Hey guys, in this video I want to talk about some very basic and simple tips that most people seem to overlook, but will instantly make you a better player. I've made a ton of videos on advanced tips and tricks for everything from building, to editing, to turtling and counter turtling, so I thought why don't we take a step back and focus more on the uncomplicated stuff. Don't be scared away because I'm calling these tips simple though. They are technically very straightforward and easy to understand, but the reason I want to cover them in depth is because of how useful they are for players of all skill levels. As you'll see, only the top pro players in the world fully utilize these seemingly simple tips to improve their gameplay. So while even little Timmy might understand the core concept at hand, he won't be able to take advantage of the technique or strategy as well as someone like Tfue can. I'll throw some timestamps on the screen now for each separate tip in case you want to skip around, but for this video especially, I highly recommend watching the whole thing through. With that being said, let's start with our first basic tip that will help you instantly improve. Understanding the grid system. Most of you probably have no idea what the grid system is, and that's because it's not an official thing. What the grid system refers to is a network of interconnecting matrices all around the map, and it's responsible for deciding where exactly your builds are placed. To help visualize it, you can go into one of the blank block worlds in creative and you can literally see it. Those lines all over the place make up the giant grid system that's underneath the actual Battle Royale map. Those lines are also the exact spots where you can build a wall or ramp. You see how if I try to place a wall anywhere near that line, it places on it? That's how the grid system works. You're not able to just place a wall anywhere you look, it has to be on the grid. Same thing goes for a ramp. The start of the ramp can only be placed on a line in the grid system. Floors and cones are the exact same concept, but they have to be placed within the grid lines. If I wanted to place a floor on top of a grid line, it would not let me, and would instead place in the middle of the nearest grid square. This is how building in Fortnite works, in case you didn't know. Everything is on the grid system. Now when you're building on the Battle Royale map, you can imagine the grid system in your head. No matter where you are, you can only place a wall and build a 1x1 where the grid lines are, even though in game they're technically hidden. The problem with disregarding the grid system is that it can seriously mess you up in build fights. If you're near the top of one of the grid squares and you try to place a ramp directly under you while jumping, you'll get stuck under it because you were not positioned correctly on the grid. If you were more aware of the grid system, you could have moved back and landed right on the ramp. This is exactly what the best builders in the world like Ghost Bizzle and Ghost Bizzle do. They have essentially mastered the grid system and building within it. They know exactly where to place their builds and where their character should be in relation to it so they can build up faster and quicker. I'm going to be using Bizzle as an example a lot in this video because of how efficient of a builder he is. He doesn't do anything flashy or twitchy like Mongrel or Mr. Savage. Bizzle keeps it simple and is one of the fastest and smoothest builders because of it. He always knows the quickest way to get or retain height while using the least amount of mats, and that's due in large part to his expertise in using Fortnite's grid system. A smart tip that I learned from Bizzle that will help you with the grid system is to pull out your builds but not place them. This way you can actually see where you're placing your build and which grid square it's connected to. This will help with those annoying times where you place a ramp and it's halfway in the floor. The reason this happens is because the grid system has elevation levels that go all the way down into the ground and all the way up to the sky. When you build a 1x1 10 stories up, you're still in the grid system and all the grid lines are still there, you're just higher up in it. If you ever need to wall yourself off, just make sure you're not blindly building a wall. Pull out your wall, but don't place it yet so you can see where the other grid lines are to build a ramp on it or to make it into a 1x1 or whatever else you want to do. Bizzle does this in the middle of a lot of his builds and high ground retakes. This helps him get a rough idea of where he is on the grid system and where he should be placing his builds next. Our next tip goes hand in hand with utilizing the grid system. We all know how important crosshair placement is in fights. In close quarter situations, you always want to have your shotgun crosshair high up so you can hit higher damage shots. Whether you're making a quick edit or turning a corner, you always want to keep your crosshair high up rather than low down. But crosshair placement is even more important for building and editing. For building, your crosshair determines which grid line or grid square you're actually building on. So when I have my crosshair over this one grid square, it places in front of me, but I can also place it to the side or behind me depending where I exactly position my crosshair. For editing, your crosshair is important for picking which build to start editing on and selecting which tiles to edit. If you position your crosshair incorrectly while selecting the tiles, then you'll accidentally select an extra one and mess up the whole edit. Or if you're not looking at the right build, you may end up editing something that you did not want to. On top of that, crosshair placement is important for learning to edit fast, like when you use scroll wheel reset. If I go too fast and my crosshair is still on top of the cone after I try to reset the floor, it will reset the cone even though it seems like I'm looking at the floor. All these mistakes can get you killed in game and mess up a nice play that you might try to make. To improve your crosshair placement, just pay more attention to it and where exactly you're looking while building and editing. When combined with the grid system, your crosshair lays down the foundation for good and efficient building. Look how fast you can build a 2x2x2 base when you know the grid system and have good crosshair placement. And on the other side of it, Kuna shows us what happens when you have bad crosshair placement. The players who can consistently use their crosshair placement and knowledge of the grid system together will be the ones who can consistently pull off plays like these. The only reason that Bizzle got off either of those insane cones was because he knew exactly where his crosshair had to be to land them. If he were just an inch or two off, they would not have placed, or they would have placed at some other grid square. Simple things like these, a lot of the time, go unnoticed, but they're what separates the best of the best from everyone else. The third simple tip I want to cover is becoming more efficient with turbo building. Turbo building is something that we all use and honestly take for granted. Because of it, we're able to do a lot of the advanced building techniques that you could not do back in Season 3. Instead of having to click and place every different build, we can just hold down the build button and everything is placed automatically. The problem with turbo building and suboptimal crosshair placement though is that it can actually mess up your builds a lot. Say that I'm doing a Thwifo cone while holding down turbo build. If I don't look far enough up, I'll cone myself and screw the whole build up. Same thing can happen when you're tunneling in scrims. If I'm trying to build a tunnel with protection to both sides and up and down, I'm not able to just blindly turbo build my walls or I'll get stuck on a wall in front of me. You actually need to stop turbo building for a second and then start again, which most people rarely, if ever, do. If you're always holding down turbo build and your crosshair placement is poor, you're going to waste a ton of materials from placing random things all over the place, or you'll make an even worse mistake like we just showed and it will cost you the fight. Bizzle is one of the best at being efficient and not just turbo building like a maniac. You never see him place a random floor or cone or wall. His building is precise and methodical. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use turbo build, you still want to use it all the time. You just want to pay more attention to those situations where it might mess you up and you might overuse it. So for the next time, you can adjust and not rely so much on turbo building. Fourth simple tip, which can also be used in conjunction with turbo building, crosshair placement, and the grid system, is your movement. I made an entire Game Sense 101 video on movement during fights, but for this video I only care about your movement during building. And of course, there's no player with better movement while building than Bizzle. Bizzle is always moving side to side on his ramps, and he's constantly repositioning his character to be in the perfect spot. His building is so smooth because he's always positioned correctly to do whatever build he needs to, like a cone jump. This way, he never loses momentum at all and is why he never loses high ground during fights. Learning to move while building isn't that hard, but a lot of it depends on your building keybinds. That's why I made the video on new optimal keybinds and stressed the importance of them. Bizzle has all of his building binds minus his wall on his thumb, so he's always in control of his movement as his fingers never leave WASD. My advice would be first to change your keybinds if your movement is struggling while building, and after that, when you have decent keybinds, practice moving around your character during random free builds. See the full extent to your mobility while building, and then try to incorporate it into real games like Bizzle does. Good movement while building, along with everything else we talked about, will go a long way, and is actually more important for getting high ground than moving your screen around like a maniac. The last simple tip I have, that again, only the top pro players like Bizzle fully make use of, are utilizing angles and peaks. The best example of this are just simple right hand peaks. Fortnite is so unique because it does not have a shoulder swapping system, which means when you're behind a door, you can fully see an enemy to your right, but they won't be able to see you at all. Other examples are high ground and low ground peaks. High ground, you can see the person on low ground with ease, while the person on low ground can't see a thing. You always want to be aware of these situations and use these angles to your advantage. You should be thinking about what your opponent sees and then play around that information rather than playing around what you see. Overall, the 5 simple tips and tricks I covered should definitely help you guys out. Remember to utilize the grid system, your crosshair placement, not always holding down turbo building, improving your movement while building, and taking advantage of angles. So, if this video helped you guys out, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and to turn on post notifications. Thank you to everyone using code JERIAN. Send me a picture of you using my code to my Twitter or Instagram, and I'll include you in the next video shoutouts. Otherwise, that's it from me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.